Hi, I'm Brian with Montana Angler, and today we're going to talk about how to find trout. One of the challenges of trout fishing is trout are not equally dispersed across a river. And many anglers, when they're learning the sport, will spend an equal amount of time. They're basically walking up the river or down the river, and every couple steps making casts, every couple steps making casts. By doing so, a lot of your casts are in water where the trout are not, and you're only spending a small amount of your casts in the trout-rich areas where they're highly concentrated. So today we're going to talk about two of the most important variables when it comes to locating where trout are concentrated in a river, and those are water temperature and water velocity. In terms of where trout are found, water temperature and water velocity go hand in hand. So let's first talk about cold water. When we have cold water scenarios, which in terms of the scope of the year would be winter, spring, and fall, trout prefer slower moving water. Trout metabolism is slow when the water temperature is cold, so we're talking about temperatures in the 30s or 40s for water temperature. They cannot afford to spend a lot of energy by fighting fast current. Water temperature also fluctuates quite a bit during the course of a day. On some streams, you might see a 12-degree difference. It might be 55 degrees first thing in the morning, and later in the day, we might be up into the high 60s. So the daily rhythms of changing water temperature are also important to pay attention to. Here we have a very productive trout run, but if we look closely, we see a lot of differences within the run, and the trout will move their location within this run throughout the course of the day and also throughout the course of the season. When we have summertime, warm water temperatures and highly active trout, we will expect to find them in the fast, high velocity riffles those riffles are full of macroinvertebrates and aquatic insects. In the spring and the fall, as the water temperatures drop, those fish will slide back into this slightly deeper water with medium speed current. This might also be where we find them early in the morning when the water temperature might be a little cooler, even on a summer day. On the far side of the run, we have very deep water and some very slow moving water. That's where fish will go to rest. That's where you're going to find them in the winter or in the late fall. So my strategy, if I'm approaching this run, is I want to check water temperature. A quick handheld thermometer is very useful for that. Typically, if I'm fishing in the middle of the summer, I am going to expect to find some trout in this fast riffle at the head of the run, especially if it's the peak feeding time of the day. If it's spring or autumn, when the water temperatures are cooled, I expect the fish to slide into this deeper, mid-level, mid-velocity run. And if there's not a lot of feeding activity, or if I'm fishing in the winter or late in the fall, I'll expect to find fish in the very slow moving water. As water temperatures rise into the mid-60s, trout are very active. When they're feeding aggressively, they'll slide into quite fast water, often very shallow, a classic riffle like we have in front of us. A great technique in water like this is to fish a dry fly with a small nymph dropper behind it. This allows us to fish both the surface and just below the water column. We expect these fish to be actively feeding. We'll often see a rise, or we'll see our dry fly yank underwater as those active fish intercept our flies. The water in front of me here has a slightly slower current speed, about a mid-level current, and the depth has dropped to 3, 4, 5 feet. This is great trout water. Trout will be in here to feed. They can also have a little bit of rest. This is where we expect to find fish early in the morning on a summer day. This is where we expect to find fish in the early fall or late in the spring. Mostly we're fishing subsurface. If there's a strong hatch, fish will come up in these glides and slicks, but often we're gonna fish a classic nymphing rig, 2 nymphs under a strike indicator, and that's what I'm gonna rig up here, and we're gonna give it a shot. So now we're targeting the run where the depth has dropped off a little bit. We have medium speed currents. And this is great trout holding water. This is where we're gonna find fish on a summer day, early in the morning when the water temps are cool. On a summer day, as that water temperature rises, they move into the riffles. This is also where we're gonna find fish all through the fall. as well as in spring months when we have longer nights and cooler waters. Most of the time with this depth, fish are not rising, with the exception of a strong hatch. A spring Baetis hatch or a fall Baetis hatch is a great example. So most of the time, this type of water, we're gonna do our classic nymphing. Euro nymphing will work. I'm fishing a thingamabobber strike indicator here. Your traditional strike indicators work quite well. The fish are still fairly active, so when they take that fly, we'll get a pretty good response with their indicator. So now we're gonna head to some holding water, deep water, slow moving water. And here, the trout are not very active. And in order to detect very subtle strikes where they might only move a few inches to the left, a few inches to the right to intercept our flies, we're gonna have a lot more luck with a very sensitive strike indicator, a New Zealand style strike indicator, or a yarn indicator. I make my own little yarn indicators using a slip knot, just some polypro yarn. And this is going to react very subtly when a fish takes. In that slow water, we're gonna see the yarn rock a little bit, rotate just ever so much. Rarely will it get yanked underwater. And we have to be aggressive when we see that, fluff it up a little bit here. When we see that yarn indicator kind of rotate a little bit, just kind of twitch, bob up, bob down, we're gonna set the hook. Often that's a fish. So now we're fishing the slowest and deepest part of this run. There's a seam right here. We have a back eddy. And in the wintertime, or when trout are not actively feeding, they'll stack up that deep water where they're protected. They'll still feed if we deliver a fly right to them. So I'm fishing that real subtle yarn indicator through very slow currents. And we're gonna just watch that indicator for any sign of a twitch. If we see a little bit of a rock, we'll set the hook. Hope it's a trout.